Good morning, Seattle. My name is Kristen Millares Young. I'm a novelist, essayist, book critic, and investigative journalist. And my debut novel, Subduction, a lyric retelling of the troubled history of encounter in the Americas, came out on April 14th. Not an easy time for anyone, but the dedication of indie booksellers at Elliott Bay Book Company and Third Place Books has helped me sustain my own sense of purpose. I am also, newly, an editor, thanks to Seattle City of Literature, which commissioned me to curate a collection of 10 essays that reflect on our city's designation as a UNESCO City of Literature. This collection, called Seismic, is not a commemoration. It's a call to action. How can literary culture influence social change? Seismic is a living portrait of a city that we love too much to lose. Now, if I had to tell you why Seattle is a literary city, I would say it is because I was able to become myself here. I learned how to inhabit my own mind in this place, and to hold space for your own story can be a revolutionary act. But the kindness and cruelty I encountered in this region have compelled me to claim my responsibility to our era. When I first moved here in 2004, I became a reporter for the Seattle Post-Intelligencer, now gone. Hurrying around town to conduct interviews on deadline, playing that game of chicken on side roads, I learned how to cope with the dark, wet chill of our winters. I'm still haunted by the specter of subduction zone earthquake. Keep what you'll need handy. And I didn't always expect disaster, and I don't know how we tolerate the cognitive dissonance of planting our lives in unstable soil. Those who moved here chose our fate within a seismic reckoning, which I've come to see as myriad. Not just geologic, but cultural. Not just topographic, but economic. Not just historical, but immediate. This place helped me become who I wanted always to be. And like so many settlers before me, I aim to stay. No es fácil. Food and shelter cost so much that people go without and are blamed for it. This too is a reckoning we must face. The compression of oncoming waves of workers in diaspora come to seek jobs that may not provide, and yet provide we must. As a city of literature, we carry stories for the unborn. What will we tell them of our time? That in a pandemic, we were forced to choose between profit and our vulnerable elderly neighbors? That death forced us to keep a social distance? That to confront and heal our racial divides, we came together or broke apart? With gorgeous, evocative, cut paper art on the cover by Mita Mahato, Seismic includes essays by Rena Priest, Jordan Keith, Claudia Castro-Luna, Charles Johnson, Matilda Bernstein-Sycamore, Tim Egan, Wei Wei Lee, Anastasia Renee, Duji Tahat, and Ken Workman, the great-great-great-great-grandson of Chief Seattle. The essays collected in Seismic represent a vision for our city that channels the best hopes of these artists. This pandemic offers an unprecedented opportunity for cultural institutions with racist legacies to reorient their practices to center and serve historically marginalized communities, rather than rebuilding structures and programs that replicate histories which erase the contributions of peoples of color. Future societies will study our time for clues about what and whom we protected. They will see whether we preserved and shared our abundance. For too long, we have ceded control of the narrative. To what end? And we cannot answer that question alone. Together, we must own up to our collective role in the long story of living. Resilience is a quality cultivated under duress, over time, against the odds, and in community. And we, whether newly arrived to Seattle or generations deep, are on Duwamish land, now deforested and poisoned by the hands of settlers who straightened rivers, sluiced hills, and flooded shorelines in the name of prosperity that has not been shared. It is time to honor the Treaty of Point Elliott. Native wisdom has endured through stories that have lasted for millennia, and that is what we must reach for. Not the millennia, not just those that have already unfurled, but those which remain for others to endure. As an arts community, we have seen what nonprofit boards and staff can do when a vision has been clearly and publicly articulated and shared. Right now, we are living in a moment that brings long overdue public attention to the value of Black lives. To hold space for these stories is a sacred duty and a real joy. But creating equity will require more than attention. Equity requires shared resources and opened networks. Unfunded initiatives are not effective. Some of you who are watching this have been part of capital campaigns that garnered millions. And as a community, we need to enshrine our values for future generations. Arts administrators, I'm asking you to create equity endowments, socially responsible funds that are invested in the long-term health of our communities, used for honoraria, scholarships, increased salaries, and opportunities for peoples of color. Also, and this is critical, the private sector needs to more than match the public sector's commitment to the arts. The City of Seattle sets aside 1% of capital improvement project funds for the arts. I'm here to tell you that the minds and futures of diverse writers are the true capital. Double down on investing in them and start getting that money out the door. Artists are in need, and they have already shown us a way forward. Now, this multi-year effort will require you, yes, you, to confront and heal the racial divide that have plagued historically white-led organizations. As an artist and a nonprofit co-founder myself, I honor the work that awaits us all to make this vision a reality. I'm glad the stranger asked me to share my thoughts this morning. Today is as good a day as any to enact the changes that we all know need to be made. Seismic will debut on September 15th as part of a virtual performance hosted by the Seattle Public Library. I'm also grateful for the stranger's recommendation of Subduction's virtual book launch, offered on Friday, October 2nd by Hugo House, Red Hen Press, and Elliott Bay Book Company, which, like the Paris Review, named Subduction a staff pick. I'm going to close by sharing a 3-minute visual poem I made in collaboration with the Bushwick Book Club's Jeff Larson, who plays an original composition on bass alongside visual animation by Jack McCool and photos by Anne Frias. Today, I ask that you buy, read, and invest locally. Even at a social distance, we are a community of thought. If the personal is political, then the local is global. Happy Friday. Balante. Peter cleared his throat and paused as he came between her path and the shore. The pale sun backed behind the clouds, snuffing out the shadows of his face, his black hair absorbing all the light, as black as anything around it, blacker. Stop staring, she told herself, and smiled, bright, but he did not return it, and kept instead a steady gaze that said he had seen her hunger. She dropped her eyes to the tangled bull kelp at her feet, their slimy fronds twisted around a net at the rack line, where breakers made their final sally before retreating, restless. A cloud of black flies floated around her ankles, her tennis shoes squished into a nest of smaller sea plants. Claudia stepped past the records of the last high tide and onto the smooth, flat sand, and they kept on, not talking, their footprints erasing themselves with damp exhales from beneath, the closest she'd get to leave no trace, or walking on water. The sea stood up and toppled over, dragging kelp and sand into itself before rising, again and again, reaching for the shore. Its passage left a thick sheen on the crust of crushed shells, which rolled on their sides and sighed, sated. Their shoulders brushed once, and again as they walked, footsteps moving toward and away from each other in subtle waves that stretched long with the languid tempo of dune ridges. Ruddy cliffs held back a cedar forest that spilled over, curving toward the sky atop a dark headland, tide pools bared to the sky. She kept her focus on that outcropping, trying not to watch Peter from the corners of her eyes as they drew nearer. His shadow at her periphery had taken over her full attention. Grazing his hand, her entire body aligned to him like filings on a magnet. She looked without looking, hearing his weight change on the beach. Claudia was relieved when they came to the headland's surf-addled rock. Where air had been, life crept in, a profusion of glossy mussels and rough barnacles, orange and purple sea stars, lime and crimson anemones, and emerald plants she could not name. Claudia crouched before the first pool, its stillness a pane of glass unto a world that did and did not pertain to her. A velvety red anemone swayed, stirred by some unseen force. She pushed a finger into its cold home, slow and careful. The anemone tuned to her, its rubbery receptors waving in her direction, beckoning. They clung to her as she slipped her nail into the folds of its body, trying to be gentle. It held her, and she lingered, feeling how dear it was, this aggressive embrace, and how it was this creature's weakness, and not the ferocity of its intent, nor the cunning of its perception, which made it dear. Her power inspired a rising tenderness. Claudia tickled but poked no further, inclining her head so a sky mirror drew over the pool, and she could regard herself being maternal. Beside her shifting face, she saw Peter. His eyes were on her. The air thickened into mist, blurring their reflection. "Come again tomorrow," he said, and left her there.